Good afternoon, and thanks to everyone for being here. My name is Ross LaJeunesse, and I'm head of state policy for the Western US here at Google. And today's panel is on Proposition 8, which I'm sure all of you know is the ballot initiative going before voters this November, which would amend the California Constitution to prohibit same-sex marriage here in California. That raises a good point. Today's panel is not balanced. And by that, I have no comment on the mental faculties of our three panelists. I'm merely stating that we do not have opponents and proponents of Prop 8 on today's panel. The reason for that is today's panel is happening through the hard work of the Gagglers group and other Googlers who oppose Proposition 8. The public policy group is supporting those efforts and is helping to host the panel. And we would do the same if we were approached by proponents of Proposition 8. So I just wanted to make that clarification before we turned it over to our panelists. We have a great group of panelists today. They are all superstars. I know each of them personally to some degree or another. And I'm just going to do a brief introduction of each before I turn it over to them. So we'll have a brief presentation from each panelist, and then I hope that we'll spend a good deal of time answering your questions and having a lively debate about Proposition 8. To my far left is Steve Smith. Now, Steve is a bit of a Sacramento legend. He is a principal at Dewey Square Group, where he focuses on community organizing and campaign management. He was the campaign manager for both No on 73 and No on 85, correct? Yep. Which were the 2005 and 2006 ballot initiatives dealing with parental notification. Steve won both those campaigns. He is now the chief strategist for the No on 8 campaign. In a prior life, Steve was Secretary of Labor under Governor Gray Davis. To Steve's right is Patrick Guerriero. Patrick is the executive director of Gill Action Fund, which is a Denver-based advocacy group which focuses on national issues surrounding equal rights for all people, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. It's a bipartisan group, and it's been around. You've been executive director since 2006, correct? Before that, Patrick was head of the Log Cabin Republicans. At the ripe old age of 25, Patrick was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives back in 1993. He served 3 terms in the House before being elected mayor of his hometown of Melrose, Massachusetts. After 2 terms as mayor, Patrick became the first openly gay candidate for lieutenant governor in the nation's history when Massachusetts Governor Jane Swift asked him to join her ticket. That was in 2002, right? To Patrick's right is Kate Kendell, and I am personally a great fan of Kate's ever since I heard her give a fantastic speech a couple of years ago, which still remains with me today. She's a brilliant advocate for equal rights for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered individuals. She does that in her capacity as executive director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights based in San Francisco. NCLR advocates equal protection for LGBT individuals through litigation, advocacy, and public education. In addition, Kate is a much sought-after national commentator on these issues. She's appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN, NPR, pretty much any publication one can think of, Kate has been there. And Kate is going to start us off today. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ross.
Why don't we just welcome our panelists first? This is great. Thanks.
And I just want to point out that Ross made those very generous introductions of all 3 of us with not one note. That's big brains, you Google people, all of you. It is great to be here and to be talking about what I think the most, well, certainly it's the most important fight that I have faced as a member of the LGBT community. I think it's one of the most important progressive fights we've ever faced in this nation. And I think its potential to turn the tide once and for all and to really change the landscape for everyone in this country, regardless of sexual orientation, is really enormous. And I truly believe the stakes couldn't be higher. It's true, as Ross pointed out, that we don't have proponents of Prop 8 on this panel, but I did grow up Mormon in Utah. So if anyone wants to, the arguments presented, I'm more than happy to go back to my roots, because the church of my childhood is a very vigorous proponent of Prop 8, and we've seen a lot of their messaging, and I've been in some conversations with some of my own family members about Prop 8. And it does stimulate significant views in the state of California and in the country. But one thing that is becoming clear is that people are recognizing that we now live in a state that treats all people equally when it comes to the right to marry. Everyone in this state can marry the person that they love. That is such an important right. It is such an important way of being. It is such an important way of understanding oneself and one's relationship. No one should grow up feeling as if their relationship is substandard, that their relationship doesn't matter, that their love is not regarded equally under the law. And we now live in a state where that is the case, and it is a truly landmark and historic moment. So what voters are facing, and what we're seeing in some of the messaging and the polling that Steve's going to talk about in a few minutes, what we're seeing is that faced with the question of whether folks are really willing to eliminate the right of same-sex couples to marry, we are finding that regardless of how people feel about same-sex couples marrying, they really do not have the political stomach, it is trending this way, although it's very, very close, to eliminate that fundamental right. For those of you who haven't seen the actual language of the initiative, it's very simple, and this is how it will appear on the ballot argument language that everyone will be getting in their mailboxes the first week in October. It's Proposition 8. This is the title: Eliminates right of same-sex couples to marry. And then, of course, these are the stakes that make us so high. It is a constitutional amendment, the highest law in the state of California. And then it's 13 quick words. Changes California Constitution to eliminate the right of same-sex couples to marry, and this is the key language, provides that only marriage between a man and a woman is valid or recognized in California. Now, that is what people are voting on, and it is important for everyone to understand what the language is, and that it's not a situation where we're saying you have to be celebrating the right of same-sex couples to marry, although for those who have gotten married or attended weddings, it's a very moving and celebratory experience. The issue is, are you willing to eliminate this very important fundamental right for a whole category of Californians? Why vote no? And this is easy messaging that you all could write yourselves, those of you who are opposed to Prop 8, that we don't eliminate fundamental rights in this country, that it's wrong to take a category of people and say, you are going to be treated differently than anybody else based on a factor that has nothing to do with your ability. That same-sex couples and individuals are a part of California, a part of this country. This is who we are. This is part of what makes this state great, part of the diversity that makes this state great. We hear arguments from the other side, and the main arguments that they are making, one of the key ones, is that California has muscular domestic partnerships that protect same-sex couples. We don't need marriage. Marriage should just be between a man and a woman. Well, we all know who have had experience with domestic partnerships that it's not the same. It's not the same vocabulary. There's not a common understanding. Couples who are in domestic partnerships still face endless questions about who they really are to each other. And when it comes down to it, we now have the right to marry in this state, and eliminating that fundamental right is not something that we should be voting on, and it's not something that voters should vote yes on. We are doing better than that in the state of California. Our polling right now, and I know people have seen a lot of public polls that show us significantly ahead, the no vote significantly ahead of the yes vote. We are much closer than some of those polls show. And there's all sorts of different methodologies that Steve can talk about more. But what you all need to understand, and what's important for us to understand in this fight, is that while it's eminently winnable, it is a dead heat. And the undecided universe is much smaller than on usually any other question at this time. And those undecideds are the folks who we really need to reach and who need to understand the message of what the harm would be. This is not a neutral vote. A vote to eliminate the rights of any category of people does harm, and it certainly does harm, will do harm to same-sex couples and their families and people who care about them in terms of their status under the law. So that undecided pool, people need to understand that it's a small universe of donors. They're everywhere. They're not in any one demographic. They're all up and down the state. But right now, we are in a neck-and-neck race, and as we go into the advertising season, it's going to be really enormously important that we have the muscular campaign to be up early, and to make sure we capture those undecideds. So the campaign structure, there's not any campaign that can ever win in California statewide based on just volunteers, or just those of us who are leaders on any particular issue, whether it's racial justice and affirmative action, or whether it's parental notification, as Steve has worked on before. You need professionals. And we knew that early on. So we went to two of the best operations and the best shops in the country to be the professionals on our campaign. You'll hear in a moment from Dewey Square. Ross obviously did great justice to Steve's credentials as our general consultant, and you'll hear more from him. Working hand in hand with Steve is Ogilvy Public Relations, also has won numerous campaigns statewide in California to make sure that the messaging that the voters see, how you win campaigns in California is those ads that people see, even though we all, by November 4th, will be completely sick of them. That messaging frames how people think about this issue. And Ogilvy, they're pros at doing this, and we feel very confident with them. We have unprecedented partnerships throughout the state, and I'm just going to go through these quickly. You're not going to be able to read them all because there's so many who are supporting, and this business list is only partial. There are many more organizations and businesses and corporations that are in process in making decisions about supporting Prop 8. We believe this list will be very long. Statewide organizations, and it runs the gamut. It's not just LGBT organizations. It's everyone who wants to live in a state where people are treated fairly and equally. Those are just fundamental principles. That's actually a conservative principle, that the government doesn't make decisions about who people marry. Government stays out of that business. The law treats everyone equally. And so we have support from all sorts of civil rights organizations, from mainstream organizations, from religious organizations. It has really been a very gratifying campaign to be involved in. So fundraising, because this is what it comes down to, folks. And I wish it wasn't just about the money. I wish it was about, let me just have a conversation with you and let's work it all out and let me get you to vote no. But it's about money. And so far we've raised over $10 million. That is unprecedented for a gay issue in the country. Never before has that kind of money been raised from 32,000 donors. Never before from that many donors. But you can all do the math. You know there are a lot more people out there who haven't given that can give and have the capacity to give. And that $10 million, not going to do it. We knew from the very beginning this was going to be a $20 million campaign. And everything that we're seeing from our opposition is not only that it's going to be a $20 million campaign, but it's probably going to be a 24, 25, maybe $26 million campaign. And that's just cold, hard fact. We believe we can raise it, but it will take people who've never written a check before to a political campaign for us to get to that mark. What we're up against, and we've seen this money pouring into the other side, mainly from, so far, the Knights of Columbus, the Mormon Church, and Focus on the Family. These are very low dollars. They'll be 4, 5, 6, 10, maybe 20 times that by the time we're done. And we just have to match them dollar for dollar. The media buy to do this We go up October 6th in all these major markets, and we're in all those markets because that's where all our undecided voters are. I wish they were all in a small neighborhood in Los Gatos. That would make it so much easier. But they are everywhere. They're in every age group. They're both Republican and they're Democrat. They're Latino, they're African American, they're white, they're blue collar, they're wealthy, they're older. They are everyone. The undecided universe is everyone that you know in your life experience, and those are the folks that we need to reach, and that's the challenge in this campaign, to reach them all and to move them to a no. Donald Wildman, who is president of the American Family Association, one of, I will say, the most vitriolically nasty anti-gay organizations in the country. And people kind of disagree around the idea of lesbian and gay people marrying, and they're not anti-gay. I want to be clear about that. People can be uncomfortable with the idea of same-sex couples marrying, and that does not make them anti-gay. Donald Wildman, anti-gay. And he has made a life's work out of really spewing forward the most vicious fear-mongering about lesbian and gay people. And this is what he says: if we lose in California, if they defeat the marriage amendment, we're done. They've won the culture wars. Now, folks, it would be good to have that win. But if he is framing it that way, a man who has made a life's work of demonizing lesbian and gay people, then if you care about anyone who is LGBT, if you are LGBT yourself, if you care about progressive issues, you have to understand that that's what's at stake as well. Because he's got the passion, and that's how you fund and support this campaign. We've got to have the same thing. So our message is a simple one. Don't eliminate the right to marry for anyone. It's a vote no on Prop 8, and get everyone you know to do the same. There are significant national implications to what we're facing, and Patrick Guerriero and Gill Action understands those ramifications and how they feed into, and how California feeds into that and affects the country probably better than anyone in the nation. He is a dear colleague, and it is really a pleasure for me to actually see you in person, since we've been exchanging 3 or 4 emails almost every single day for the last 3 months as we work on the campaign. So I'll let Patrick talk about the national picture.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Kate. Kate not only brings obviously great intellect to this argument, but also a great deal of emotion. And it's hard not to be emotional and passionate about this. I know last night over dinner, I had a conversation with some folks, and it's a sense that we are on the ballot. I mean, this is not a ballot. Coming from California, you're used to a lot of ballot initiatives. This is a unique one in that human beings, us, our friends, our neighbors, our partners, are on the ballot, and our dignity, our basic fairness is on the ballot. There's a lot of emotion that comes with that, and for those of us who believe that we're living through the kind of civil rights movement of our generation, it's difficult not to have the blood pressure go up and to be anxious and to come at this campaign from a very, very emotional place, which is why I often become the slightly different person in the room, because I come from a universe in running Gill Action, which is an organization that invests in education and advocacy and hardcore political work around the country. I come from a lens that is remarkably dispassionate sometimes, unemotional, deeply data-driven, deeply research-driven, deeply poll-driven, because there are a whole lot of battles that are being fought all across the country that matter to not only LGBT people, but progressive people all over the nation. And in doing so, part of our job is to go back to our donor, and his name is Tim Gill, who's one of the most generous philanthropists and political investors in the nation, and a group of other donors, generous donors around the country that we give political counsel to, and make recommendations to them about the places where their money, if invested, can make the most difference in the fastest amount of time. And we have literally traveled the country. We've looked at every ballot initiative. We've looked at every state race. We've looked at all the different dynamics that happen in an election year, and we've decided really recently, to be honest, that this is singularly the most important thing happening in November other than the federal election. We believe this has huge ramifications, not only for California and every single LGBT family here, but something you might not be aware of is that not only would this be the first state ever to have the public affirm the basic fairness for all families, but there are a number of states that literally are waiting and watching to see what happens in this state. And I'll give you a few examples. In New York, the state legislature and the governor are very close to reaching a point where they could pass marriage equality and have the governor sign it next year. They're watching and waiting to see what happens in California. In New Jersey, we have a legislature right on the edge of passing marriage equality, and the governor is watching what happens in California to determine whether this will pass the muster of the public. Even in places like Iowa, the court is about to rule over the next 8 to 12 months in what could be a historic decision in the middle of the country about whether to affirm the rights of same-sex couples in Iowa to marry. And you better believe that court and that legislature and the public in Iowa is taking a look at what happens here in California. So we have never seen in any state before a single ballot initiative that would impact more people and impact more states. And we have actually told a number of our investors and donors that we talk to that we actually think this will determine whether we're able to realize full equality for LGBT families in this country over the next 15 years, or whether it's going to take 2 or 3 generations. 15 years versus 50 years. This race actually has that type of exponential effect across the spectrum. And when you add to that our enemies are often the enemies of the pro-choice movement, often the enemies of the environmental movement, when you hear Don Wildman saying this is really ground zero for the culture war, they also understand what is at stake in November here in California. And so we've determined this to be the most important race in the entire country. That alone, though, would not lead us to tell people to invest. There are a lot of really important races that don't meet the criteria to win, and so we did a full analysis of this ballot initiative. The first question is, can you win based on the data you have around polling and the research you have? And the answer is unequivocally yes. The polling shows, depending on whose poll you believe, that we're within 5 to 10 points up or down, depending on what day of the week it is, the climate. And so this is and I think, Kate, you've termed it well, a dead heat, a complete dead heat that could either win by a couple points or lose by a couple points. The second question is, does this state and its generous citizens have the capacity to raise the money necessary to wage a full-fledged campaign? In a lot of states, the answer is no. In this state, the answer is yes, except that there is a tremendous amount of urgency because literally TV time needs to be purchased within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And I will be so raw as to say this. From the numbers we have seen and analyzed, if our opponents outraise us, we will lose. That's a tough thing to say, but we really believe that's the case, and that is a level of urgency around making sure we can fund a full-fledged campaign. The next question we asked ourselves is that, can the LGBT movement that has such tremendous heroes move from just being a progressive advocacy movement to one that actually empowers smart, strategic political thinkers to make hardcore political choices to win an election? And we're convinced, after taking a real close look at this campaign over the last several weeks, that they've hired some really smart people, the best available to run the smartest campaign, and that the LGBT organizations are almost completely there in terms of putting ego and organization aside and micromanagement aside and allowing the smartest people to be empowered to make the tough choices that will take place between now and Election Day. And then the last piece we always look for is trends. What we know is the public witnessed a lot of wonderful people getting married only weeks ago for the very first time in this state. And the public was told by the far right that the locust and plague would be hitting California within days. It seems like we've done okay since those marriages. I don't think any heterosexual marriages have been threatened. So all the doom and gloom that we also heard in Massachusetts and we also heard that would happen in California didn't happen here. And so there seems to be this underlying belief that there's good energy, there is a good feeling here, but it's going to be damn close however we look at it. The good news, under a fairly unemotional, data-driven, poll-driven analysis of the status of this campaign, we are well positioned to win if we can raise the money and deliver the message into the living rooms of people across the state. And one of the persons best capable of doing that is Steve Smith. He's fairly modest, at least most of the time. But Steve has been doing ballot initiatives for 3 decades. I kidded earlier that you started when you were 5, I guess. For 3 decades, he's been doing ballot initiatives. He's done over a dozen no on certain ballot initiative campaigns, and he's won every single one of them. And so we've put the kind of the trust and the confidence into one of the best people possible to make sure we can win. Steve.
Howdy. You know, it's always nice to know that a Republican from Massachusetts and a Democrat from California can hang out a little
Glad
bit.
you're on my left.
Yeah, well, I will always be on your left, brother. Let me talk a little bit about where we are and then what we got to get done in the next very short period of time. There have been some references here about 40, 40, 20. That really is where it is. There have been 7 polls done in the last about 9 or 10 weeks. Some of those are public, some of those are private. Every one of them has come back. They had different results, but every one of them has come back within that 40-40 margin. Sometimes we're ahead, sometimes they're ahead. But there's always the same 20% swimming around out there. That's the 20% that we need to talk to, that we need to convince in the next 2 months. How you convince them? We are now, I mean, there's been a lot of preparation. Kate's been getting ready for this campaign, what, 3 or 4 years? Yeah, that's a different way to look at it. That's exactly right. But we're now down to it. 27 days from now, those of you who are absentee voters will go home to a ballot in your mailbox. 30 days later, the election happens. We're there. Now, the thing that we all need to do is talk to voters. And in this election in California, there will be 12.5, 12.6 million voters. More voters than have ever cast a ballot in any single state in any election in this country. That's what's going to happen because I mean, look, let's face it, the presidential is energizing, folks. There's going to be a huge turnout. We have to take advantage of that. We have to talk to those 20% of the voters and get them to come our way. I've told this client this several times. That when I managed the No on Prop 85 campaign for Planned Parenthood 2 years ago, literally the first campaign poll that said that we were ahead, I read at the breakfast table on Election Day. We had been behind the entire time in closing the gap. This is not that kind of situation. I've seen polls saying we're ahead. I've seen polls saying we're slightly behind. But we're going to do this right up until the wire, and the only way we're going to win, again, is to talk to those voters. How do you talk to voters in California? It's called television and radio, because there's too damn many of us to do it any other way, frankly. This just is not New Hampshire. That's all there is to it. And that means that we need to go up on the television, we need to buy more advertising than they're buying, and we need to deliver our message. Kate talked about talking to people. You cannot eliminate the right to marry. You have to allow committed couples who are in love with each other to go out and get married. We're there now. We're there after a huge fight. We now need to stay there. And in California, the nice part about this is it's already been discussed in so many forums that if we win this, it's done. Remember, the legislature's passed it twice. The governor now supports our side of the issue. The court has now ruled. There's only one other body out there left to decide. It's called the voters. So if the voters say no on 8, we're done. There is no more place for the other side to play their games. That means we need to communicate with them. Are we going to get 250,000, 500,000 volunteer phone calls made? Yes. Are we going to do mail and phone to probably 1.5 million, 2 million voters? Yes. But the only way we're going to reach out and touch 12.4, 12.5 million voters is on the television. into folks' living rooms, to some degree on the internet. That's it. That's the only way we get to those folks. So that's how we have to do it. This is California. We got to win this fight. We got to go up on the television. That's how we're going to do it. For people who are struggling in the last 57 days, and that's the way I would characterize that 20%. These are folks that this is not an easy decision. They don't necessarily support gay marriage. In fact, most of that undecided probably don't. They don't necessarily oppose it. Might be a little uncomfortable with it, but what they need to understand is they don't need to be comfortable. They just need to say, I don't need to be comfortable. Those people, we have a right. Everyone has a right to marry the person they love. That simple. That's what they have to get comfortable with. That's what we're going to communicate to them. We have to communicate on their language, with their language, starting from where they come from, and bring them home to a no vote. Absolutely doable. We're going to go up on the television. We're going to go up on the television the first week in October. The real question is, are we going to get to go up on the television earlier? Because whoever gets up on the television first will probably win this campaign. It's a funny thing. It's been mentioned several times here. I've done more campaigns than, frankly, I want to think about. Yes, I am as old as I look. Most of it has been taken out of me in campaigns. Almost every time one side or the other gets up, it can only be a matter of a few days, it can be a week, and they essentially put out an ad that defines the race. Guess what? If they go up, God knows how they'll define the race. Actually, lately we've heard about bigamy. We've heard about, are we going to teach our kids in kindergarten? We've heard, oh, domestic partnership, you don't need this. We've heard a bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with should people be allowed to marry the person they love. If we go up, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about should people be allowed to marry the person they love. We're going to talk about don't eliminate those people's rights to get married. Don't treat them differently. That's what we're going to talk about. That is what's on the ballot. That's the decision. The other side gets up first and makes this about all sorts of other stuff. I'm going to end up, and the whole coalition is going to end up, spending 2 or 3 weeks trying to straighten out in people's heads what this campaign's about. We don't have the time to do that. We need to just go and make our case, tell them what it's about, and then, this is California. People do believe in freedom. They do believe in other people's rights, and we'll win this race. But we'll only do it if we get up there first and tell them, this is it. Don't believe all the crap, frankly, coming from the other side. Thank you. More than willing to answer any questions.
Please join me in thanking our panelists. All right, so the mics are open. If any of you have questions, please just go to one of the mics. And then for the satellite offices who are joining us by VC, we'll also be taking your questions. We'll just take a couple from the live audience first.
Hi, I want to thank you for all being here. I've met several of you before. I know you're doing incredible work. I am getting married to my same-sex partner in a week and a half. And I would rather not have to deal with legal confusions come post-November. And what's more important to me, after 25 years of being with this man, is that nobody else has to wait 25 years before their state catches up with them. I have 2 questions, if I may. One is, when talking to corporations, how do you make what is essentially has to be a business case that they should oppose Proposition 8 and that they should lay out cash to do it?
You want to take that first? You can go first. Well, I think one thing that's good about being in a state like California is the first part of that is a pretty easy case to make. We live in a state and a country actually, where the vast majority of Fortune 500 companies have non-discrimination policies, have LGBT employee groups, and Bennett heads the one here at Google. It's good to see you again, Bennett. And it's just a part of the workforce, and it's a part of retaining the best and the brightest. Not saying that lesbian and gay people are smarter than most people, but we're a part of the pool of people that you want to retain. And it's a part of good business to make sure that there's no barrier to the best employee wanting to come work for you. So that's a pretty easy case to make in California, and businesses get that. The second piece is a little bit harder, but this is what we're finding. And with PG&E and Levi and Strauss Company and AT&T supporting no on Prop 8 and giving money, what they're recognizing is we're past the time in California where it's enough to say, to retain the best and the brightest. We have non-discrimination policies. We have a LGBT group. Everyone is understanding this is the fight that defines exactly what kind of workplace you are and what the business commitment is. It's not about words on a paper. It's not about a corporate equality index of any one particular organization. It is about making sure that Prop 8 is defeated. And we've found, as people have been talking to lots of different corporations in the Silicon Valley as part of our business council, and if any of you have connections to corporations, Google obviously would be number one on that, but others as well. You should talk to me and I can put you in touch with the Business Council, because we found that that message works. And then what do you think is the other number one thing that gets money from corporations? Money that comes from their competitors. So if Google jumps first publicly in the Silicon Valley, you get the hit of being first, and then everyone else will come along. And if Google doesn't go first, that's fine. Somebody's going first, and that's in process right now. But both those things we find are really effective.
Okay. Just as a minor correction, I would never say I was head of the Gaglers group. We have a whole steering committee and everything. I'm the coordinator, which sounds very gay, and rightly so. And it's a much weaker position, believe me.
Well, they call me the head lesbian, so
yeah,
I just...
Okay. The other question, and this is the thing that frustrates me the most and that I'm most scared of, really, is that the issue is framed, and not only just by our opponents, as gays versus Christians, gays versus people of faith, gays versus families. And even the newspapers will call Donald Wild's organization, I mean, it's got a name, American Family Association. They can use the name as far as I'm concerned, but they'll also call it a family organization, a Christian organization. And I know enough families and enough Christians to know that what that is really an anti-gay organization with a funny name. That framing seems so embedded in all conversations about this. The way the television shows will introduce one gay person and one Christian. What are we going to do to shift that? Because I think that's the way we lose.
Yep, that's a good point.
A couple of points, and I'll let Steve get to the core of the messaging piece to it, is one, we have to recognize we're probably not going to change some of that framework within 60 days, which is a tough thing to see, but we can change the framework by which people look at civil marriage licenses. And so yes, we can push to have really smart spokespersons who can speak with a level of religiosity on the news and in newspapers, and that's going to be done. But we also aren't going to change this greater framework all throughout California, and need to understand that, as I think was really smartly done on the day of the first marriages, that there was a wonderful celebration, and it was beautiful, but it was clearly civil marriage licenses, people walking into city halls and town halls, getting a piece of paper and recognizing their sometimes half a century relationship. And so it diffuses that swing voter's sense of, is this about my own marriage or not? Because this is such a tight timeline. And what we found just in one other state where we've had some experience with this is that when the public saw individuals asking for a piece of paper, a license to recognize their relationship in Massachusetts, that swing voter ended up moving just slightly to our side, which is why Steve's point about framing this argument really fast in the next few weeks about that versus the questions that others would want to propose, I think is the critical linchpin to winning.
Good news and bad news here. The good news is, this is going to sound really funny, that the fundamentalist churches are going to put 40,000, they're going to try to put 40,000 people in Qualcomm Stadium for a prayer vigil on the Sunday before the election. I know it sounds funny, I'm saying it's good news. For undecided voters in the state of California, they are a little uncomfortable with that notion, frankly. So what we're going to do is, leading up to that, we're going to take some recognized religious leaders in this state and have them in quiet tones, not sort of threatening and rhetorical and all that, talk about what's real. That in fact, love, commitment, marriage, families is not exclusive to straight Californians. And it's going to cut on that issue, and I think it probably works real well with their base, but the folks get really excited because that's just who they are. I think for undecided, for that 20% in the middle, that's going to end up cutting our way slightly if we handle it well.
And one quick footnote, if every single LGBT person in this state and our friends and family and allies just sent to their email universe a statement, my family is on the ballot this November,
right,
that alone could be worth a couple points to determining winning and losing. And we discovered on the other side of the country that some of the most passionate LGBT activists never asked their own family for a vote. And let's not make that mistake here in California, because that could actually be the difference on top of the advertising campaign.
So let me start by mentioning an anecdote. A friend of mine was doing some canvassing in Palo Alto, and he said there were multiple people he ran into who said, oh yes, I support gay people to marriage, I'm going to vote yes on 8. He's like, oh, stop. So obviously you guys know how to handle that, but I just thought I'd mention the anecdote that even just last weekend he was still getting that.
It's a problem.
But my question is, so I've already given more money, actually 10 times more money to this campaign than I've ever given to any other political thing. What else can I do? I mean, is that the only thing?
No.
No, it's not the only thing. And so let me say, first of all, thank you for giving. And if everyone gave 10 times what they've given to anything else, we would win this thing. So that is a great example. Thank you. The other thing you can do, there are action items on the noonprop8.com website. And the biggest things that you can do are what Patrick alluded to, making sure that there's never anyone who knows you that doesn't know they should vote no. From your dry cleaner, the most incidental contacts to the most substantial contacts. Waking up every day saying, who do I talk to today? What can I do today to defeat Prop 8? Letters to friends and family. There's a whole Google network of folks that probably haven't given and don't know much about this, asking people to give, which you may not have done before. We can give you templates for being able to do that. And then one of the most important parts of the campaign, the field component of the campaign, and there is an office down here in, I think it's in San Jose, is the field office, but you can actually contact me directly and I'll put you in touch with folks to do some phone banking. Even though, what your phone banking is, you're not doing cold calls, and I understand people are like, ooh, I just don't want to call strangers, but let me just say, to Steve's earlier point, we will win this within the margin of error. That margin of error could be, Michael Phelps' fingernail, is what we say in the campaign. And that could be the 250,000 voters that we are going to call phone banking, asking them to vote no. Grab a bunch of your friends, go out and make a night of it, 2 hours phone banking, take them out for a couple of pictures, and you will have done an enormous amount in addition to the other list of things.
The pictures before or after the calls?
Well, it just depends. I'll leave it up to you.
Do you get better?
All right, why don't we take a question from one of the satellite offices, remote offices, by, it's audio, right, just audio? Anyone out there have a question for our panel? Going once, going twice. Okay, do you want to make that point?
Oh, yes.
Thanks, John.
No matter where you live. Internationally?
No. I'm sorry, the question was to clarify that regardless of where you reside, you are legally able to contribute to the campaign.
Yes, you have to be a citizen of the United States, but... Or green card holder, thank you. Yes, or green card holder. Yeah, you all would know that, wouldn't you? Yes. And you can give money to the campaign either through the website. You can, there's a way to give there, or contact the website about the contact information there about wanting to make a gift. Above the $10 million that you see there and the $32,000 or 32,000 donors that we talked about earlier, a significant percentage, not a majority of course, but a significant percentage is from outside of California, because there's not a state that won't be touched, as Patrick talked about, by this, so no matter where people live. So if you have wealthy friends or family outside of the state of California who you think would be willing to make a contribution, we will do whatever we need to do at the campaign to help you facilitate that. We will provide you talking points, a sample letter, walk you through it. You know, I'll get on the phone myself with them, depending on the size of the gift. And you can, from anywhere you live, you can give. Yes, good question.
I want to go back to the framing and messaging discussion, although Stephen, partly addressed, what I had as a question. So what we've heard here is it's not for Californians who are in the 20%. You don't need to feel comfortable with it. It's just, someone else's business, which is a great progressive, a great, libertarian argument, but I'm concerned how it gets to the Christian base. Then what we heard is, someone's family is on the line, which is also a great argument, but it's a little bit like a pity argument, and there is some condescension, like the straight majority relating to the LGBT minority. So again, I'm wondering to what extent it gets to the Christian base. So I'm thinking that what I don't hear is like really positive, like affirmative arguments. Let's say because the LGBT minority wants to join and is joining in the institution of marriage itself, it actually affirms the marriages of, Christian people. Because I've heard in some states there are people who like remarry because they feel that, gay marriage has threatened their sacred institution of marriage and all of that stuff. So it seems that it can be switched, like the argument can be switched and say, look, your institution of marriage is, reaffirmed, and by voting no to the proposition, you're reaffirming your own, basically, Christian, if need be, institution. So I just haven't heard that, and I'm wondering if there will be anything.
Twist. Yep. What if I were to go down that path, the way I would say that precisely, and I got to say, words in this thing matter a lot.
Yeah.
I would say don't eliminate our right to affirm marriage, to join the. We gay and lesbian people want to stand up and share in the responsibility, the commitment, the joy of marriage. Don't eliminate our right to do that. So I'd take it that one step. Yes, make it positive, make it affirming, but then do the elimination at the end, because in fact, that's what motivates folks.
Have there been studies on as to like how wording changes, like poll results, like what is the data?
Let me give you just one little example, and it's a little off, but clearly when you talk about treating people differently, another way to say that is discriminate. If you use discriminate, about 10-15% of the people won't buy it as well as if you just say treat people differently. You get a 10 to 15% different reaction. That's why the word eliminate is so. The word eliminate is probably worth 10 points. Just using that word. So that's why I say when you make the positive affirming, yeah, we want it. We want the responsibility. We want the commitment. Don't eliminate our right to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I agree here.
I think you actually just answered my question. My question was going to be, in October when you go onto the airwaves, are you going to be putting forward a positive message saying, equality for all, or are you going to be saying don't destroy our...
We're going to. It's a positive message to some degree, but let me just say, and this goes back to, I forget who it was earlier that said there is confusion out there. Every ad you see us do at the end will be a negative. We're looking for a no. Vote no on 8. We can't allow any confusion about that at the end.
And so, Eve, could you just talk a little bit about how voters who are undecided at the last minute generally go toward the no anyway, right? If they don't understand it or they're not sure, it goes no.
Right. Generally, if you're pushing a yes vote, you have a bigger burden than if you're pushing a no vote, generally in most elections. So if folks go into a voting booth and they're not sure yet, people are kind of, they get nervous about change, frankly. Right. So if they haven't really made up their mind, you're likely to get a no vote. The one thing I will say that makes this slightly different is in some people's heads, we're the ones looking for the change now because marriage is relatively recent. So we have a slight tinge on that, but we still have to drive vote no on 8. And as you have all your conversations, and I want to again say, one-on-ones, putting it on the basis to your friends of, hey, this vote is about me. Proposition 8, you're voting on me. You're going to pull some friends that way. And they know you.
Since I'm the least... That might work with some of our enemies.
Those are your enemies, yeah, right?
I'm the least politically correct up here. I do want to note one thing about this campaign, is that if I'm completely comfortable with the ad that Steve puts up in a few weeks, we'll probably lose. If you're completely comfortable with the ad you see and it moves you in a special place, it's probably not the right ad to move those people. And one of the things we do once we analyze a campaign and the political landscape and the data and the polling and research, at some point we step back and say, he knows, or we believe he is totally capable of figuring out what that message is, and there will be a lot of members of the LGBT community, maybe even the progressive community, that don't like that ad, or don't like the fact that the ad might change 10 days later, depending on what the other side does. And from what we've seen around the country, most of the times, the LGBT movement has never been able to pull back and ended up micromanaging the message and critiquing the message, and we ended up with a message that made us feel really good at night until election night. And so a big, bold step for all of us, including those of us who are investing big time in this, is to come to a place where we just kind of embrace that and accept stepping out of control, trusting that there's a real smart team in place. So that's a tough thing for all of us, and I'm sure all of us in the room today.
Okay. Why don't we switch off and go over here?
You almost answered my second question. There are really two things that scare me about this thing, which is number one, what I want to call the David Duke effect. And that the polls may show they're equal, but people are going to lie and tell the pollsters what they think the pollsters want to hear rather than what they want to feel. And the second is, can the gay community really make hard-headed political decisions? I keep on thinking of what recently happened with HRC and ENDA, where HRC made what they thought was not the politically correct decision, but the correct political decision, and they just got rammed for it. Everyone hated them as a result. So
I'll defend you for a second here, in the sense that the good news is, unlike the HRC model, which was a very difficult experience for the community and divided really well-intentioned people, is that to the credit of Kate and many other of the leaders in California, there has been a 2-3-year process of getting to a place where we knew this campaign was going to happen at some point. And literally from the last year and a half, people have been told, this campaign may be something that you are ultimately uncomfortable with when it comes to every strategic decision. And so, no, there isn't a history of doing it. This campaign and the coalition groups, I think, have a very clear understanding that that's going to be the case, especially between now and Election Day. Okay. And if we don't overcome that, we will lose. And that's, it's a very legitimate concern.
Yeah, and I could just say, I mean, we're already knee-deep in messaging at this point, and the messaging is based on what the polls in the focus group says. It's not based on the ad that I would like to see, as a radical lesbian feminist, up on the TV. And we all understand that.
I've heard that about you. I've heard that about you.
And we really haven't had a disagreement about that. I just have to note, because I actually completely disagree about your characterization about the HRC thing, and it's not a political correct or not. I think strategically it was a bad decision, but I'm just saying that I don't want to get off point about it, but I just have to bookmark it.
That.
But to the bigger issue that you're raising, we are completely on board with winning. I want to wake up November 5th, knowing, I mean, I'm going to wake up knowing that I did everything I possibly could. There is nothing more I could have done to defeat Prop 8. I don't want to be second-guessing anything that I did or my level of commitment. And I'm certainly not going to lose it because I was wedded to messaging that I liked that was not driven and supported by the data.
And let me just finish out the response to your first part of your question.
Okay.
If we don't walk in there with a 10-point lead in the polls, we're in trouble.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, that's the bottom line. Yeah.
My question relates to the language about the economic effects upon the state if Prop 8 passes or doesn't pass. I noticed that there was something relating to tourism revenue, but there was nothing about the effect of LGBT workers choosing to come to the state or to leave the state depending on what happens. Has there been any kind of analysis done on this, whether it be by the state or by no on Prop 8?
Yeah, I believe the Williams Institute at UCLA has done a study that shows that figure. They were still fine-tuning it. I haven't seen the actual final report, but that is one of the kind of many talking points that will be circulated between now and November, and it's the Williams Institute that really is the best in the country at doing that type of work for these ballot initiatives.
Okay,
We didn't
thanks.
have the data in time for the fiscal analyst's language. So otherwise it would say like, $1 billion, and maybe that would be enough to, drive people to vote no. But it's a very well taken point.
We're at right about 4 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of the panelists' time, but I think we have time for one more question. Sure. Is that good?
You bet.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that my wife and I know 5 long-term couples who've been getting married within about a 2-month period here, and in each case we've been donating to No on 8 in their honor as a wedding gift. We figure that's a little more meaningful than yet another toaster oven. And those 5 couples include, by the way, our current pastor, 2 former pastors and their partners. And I'd just like to say I and my wife certainly resent Wilderman and the rest of the religious right trying to monopolize the name of Christian, because they certainly do not speak for us. So 2 questions. One is, what can the progressive religious community do to help defeat Proposition 8, aside from what we're already doing? Obviously, there's limits in terms of what one can do, in terms of direct action within the church. But being like-minded people, we want to get that message out. And then also, I was hoping that Patrick could speak a little bit more to the history in Massachusetts and how opinions have turned around there just by the fact of gay marriage being established. It seems, from 3,000 miles away that really has turned a bunch of people's opinions around, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure, I'll maybe connect both questions and wrap them into one, which was one of the most powerful things that happened, that every time the radical right would go on TV or hold a press conference or issue a press release, the progressive religious community chose to do something that I thought was really, really smart. They didn't decide to debate the Bible or the interpretation of Scripture. They chose to talk about how we treat our neighbors, about their view of religiosity, about Christianity, and they kind of flipped the entire argument completely upside down. And it was beautifully done, because the work to have a heavy-duty, multisyllabic religious debate is one we ultimately lose in a tight time frame about a complex issue that people are struggling with. But their willingness to stand at a microphone, stand publicly, speak at public hearings and say, I'm a man or a woman who believes in God and believes that my neighbor should be treated absolutely equally, was the beautiful counterpoint. It didn't win the far-right voter. It didn't get to that 40% that aren't going to be with us, but it did move just that small group of people that needed to step our way. And then the last thing, the only negative part about all the marriages in Massachusetts was that it's cost me so much money in wedding gifts over the last couple of years, so the economic impact is actually negative individually. You've done a really beautiful, probably the most beautiful thing you can do, which is ensure that the next generation of young people won't have to question whether they can marry the person that they love, and that is a great act of Christianity, and I applaud you for that. And we, like you, have realized in Massachusetts that all of the threats of the far right have not come true. And the public, which used to be 35% supporting marriage equality, moved up to 50. Once the weddings happened, moved up to 55. And now 2 out of every 3, including the majority of Republicans, support full marriage equality for everyone in a state. It's a pretty amazing place to live, and this great state's going to be the next one to experience that milestone.
Danielle, did you have a question? I saw you by the mic. Are you all set? Just one last quick one. Come on up.
Hey, thank you. I am Danielle. I work in the executive office, and I am one of 10 kids, number 3 out of 10, and I was just instant messaging my dad. My dad is a diehard Republican Catholic, and I was like, hey, Dad, I'm up to mischief, and he asked what I was doing, and I mentioned where I was, and his question was, can't you just call it something else? He's like, it's not marriage. Can't you just call it something else? So I wanted to have you guys really pinpoint what the differences between domestic partnerships and marriages are. I have my family being very Catholic, and they're from Pennsylvania, so I said, Dad, you're not registered to vote in California, so it doesn't matter. And
but we'll humor you anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, you know, I mean, if I had $1 for every time I'd been asked that question, you know, I could fund the campaign. And what I've taken to saying when people ask me that question is I say, why? Because think about, what are they asking? What they're saying is they think there's something special about men and women's relationships that gay and lesbian couples do not share. So the word marriage should be reserved for those real relationships, the most important relationships, the relationships that I understand the most, because I don't really get this. So once I hear the answer back to tell me why you would like it to be a different name, it generally uncovers some level of discomfort, which provides a perfect opportunity to say, because then my next question is, well, let me just turn the tables. How about if we call your relationship a civil union or a domestic partnership and mine a marriage? Would you give up the word marriage? Give up the word marriage for everyone, and everyone has a civil union. Now, while that might be some people's idea of that's a perfect solution for this, and then if you get married in a church, it's called marriage. That's not where we are in this country. Marriage is the institution and the vocabulary that we use to denote the highest level of a commitment between two people. It is what we do. And as long as we do that, gay and lesbian relationships should not be excluded from it. It's as Terry Stewart said in the argument before the California Supreme Court when she was asked this very question. Words matter. There's a reason why this language matters and why your dad, who sounds like a lovely person, sounds just like my dad, who I love, wants to ask that because he wants it to go away instead of a continuing conversation that says, this is about us and our relationships being able to be validated in the same way. No dad ever said, I can't wait to dance at my daughter's civil union domestic partner commitment ceremony. We dance at our children's weddings. We get married. And as long as that is the way we mark importance in relationships and commitment, same-sex couples should have that same opportunity.
All right, help me thank Kate, Pat, and Steve.